Welcome to a new episode of TLDR, CISPA's first podcast series. TLDR is short for Too Long Didn't Read, because we want to save you the hassle of reading long research papers with this podcast. We talk to our researchers directly and try to get them to explain their work in a way that even I, not being a cybersecurity researcher, can understand it. Speaking of me, my name is Tobias Ebelshäuser from CISPA's Communications Department, and joining me today is Julian Loss. Julian is a tenured track faculty at CISPA who joined us late last year from University of Maryland to do research at the intersection of distributed computing and cryptography. Hi Julian, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
As I've said, you're quite new here at CISPA, and have you already settled in here in Saarbrücken?
Yeah, I think I have. I moved here in October, and I like the place. It's great for running, and enjoy the outdoors. I enjoy my colleagues, and I think research-wise, it's also going good. I've settled in. I'm starting to build my group. I've now three people hired, and probably going to hire some more soon. So
any particular thoughts on CISPA's research environment, like being together with so many different colleagues?
Yeah. I think that's what I mean. Like it's a very, very diverse environment. There are a lot of different people that you can work with, and that's something that I really appreciate here because, as you said, I work at the intersection of two different topics. One of them being distributed computing, and then the other being cryptography. And there are actually people here who are working on both of these topics. So, for example, I worked on a project with Christoph Lenzen, which is now a paper at Pod C this year. And I also have collaborations with Lucian Hanslik and with Kas Kremers. We're working on that. And so there's a lot of opportunities to work with other people, and I really appreciate that.
Okay. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about the work you're doing at CISPA right now in these fields?
Yes, sure. So in the area of cryptography, one of my specialties is provable security. So proving the security of crypto systems with formal arguments. And what I focus on specifically are signatures and their variants, digital signatures. So digital signature is like a handwritten signature. The purpose is very similar. The idea is that you sign a document using some cryptographic algorithm, and anybody can then verify that it would have been you who signed the document, and nobody can forge your signature. On the other hand, verification is efficient, so anybody can do it very easily. And then cryptographic signatures have a lot of applications. They're used in most electronic payment systems, for example, very, very prominently now in blockchains to protect your cryptocurrency assets. Without signatures, your money wouldn't be secure on a blockchain. They're also just a very fundamental building block. A lot of higher order crypto applications use signatures as a subroutine. In the area of distributed computing, my focus is mostly on distributed consensus, which is the problem of agreeing on a common output among a set of different parties. So this is a very fundamental problem. Also, basically, you have a set of many parties, say n parties, and they can communicate with each other over a large network. And now they want to reach some common output. And the problem is that you can have faulty players who send bad values to different parties. Like, for example, distinct messages that they shouldn't send to different parties, and then they can confuse the good parties and have them output different values. And protocols such as these are very important in cryptographic applications, such as multi-party computation or secret sharing. There we typically have some layer of consensus where we try to agree on some common output to make the protocol run correctly. So one typical application of consensus is so-called state machine replication. So what does that mean? Basically, you have some kind of replicated database system, and you have clients that can perform updates on these databases, right? So there is some data stored on those databases, and clients can update the database. And in a classical system, non-replicated system, there is just one central database. It's operated by the database provider, but if the database crashes, then all of your data is lost. So, and of course, that is not ideal, as we know. And so what modern systems do is they try to replicate the database across multiple servers. So instead of having a single server, you could maybe replicate it across 10 servers, right? And then the idea is that if one of them crashes or I don't know, becomes hacked, then the data on the database is not lost and you don't lose access to your data. But the problem with this is that you have to make it so that these 10 replicated databases actually store the same information. In particular, when you update the information in some way, like when you upload a new file or you change a file or something, it has to be replicated in the same manner across all of these databases. And this is an instance of consensus, right? So they have to all perform the same update and agree on the update and also on the order in that the updates take place, because it can make a difference in which order updates take place. If you think, for example, about a monetary system, right? It makes a difference if I first spend $10 and later try to buy something, or if I first try to buy something and later spend $10, right? So that's in one case, the transaction would go through and the other wouldn't go through. And my focus is to optimize these consensus routines, so to make them more communication and computation efficient, essentially, and have them run faster.
That sounds very diverse, but I think like one common denominator is that it's always about different parties agreeing to something. I mean, with a signature, it's basically the same. It's you agree that this signature is mine. So it's always about...
That is an interesting point, yeah, because so actually one application of digital signatures is actually to use them in consensus routines. So you can improve we call it fault tolerance of consensus routines. And what that means is that you can tolerate more parties who deviate from the protocol and try to cheat it. So without signatures, we know that if you have n parties, then the most that you can possibly tolerate is less than n over 3 parties. And otherwise, there is no solution to the consensus problem. But if you start using digital signatures, then you can actually tolerate up to n half, so half of parties being faulty. So it gives you a lot of power to use these signatures. And intuitively, what a signature gives you is that you can take some decision in the protocol, and then you can justify it to another party. So you can collect, for example, a bunch of signatures, and if you have enough, then you take a certain decision in the protocol, and then you can convince somebody else to take the same decision by showing them the same signatures. And that is why they are so powerful in these kind of algorithms.
But what would a faulty party mean in that general area? Like, is it someone... You said they're cheating. How would that look like?
So you can imagine that the consensus protocol, or the multi-party computation protocol more generally, it has certain instructions, right? And the instructions tell you to do certain things in the protocol. Send this value, or take this decision, send this message to these parties, sign this message, whatever. And now a faulty party doesn't have to do that, right? It doesn't have to play by the rules. And in general, we make actually absolutely no assumption on what these parties could do. They could deviate from the protocol completely and send, for example, conflicting messages to different parties in the protocol. So if the protocol says send the same message to all parties in the system, then a faulty party could just send arbitrary conflicting messages to all these parties. And this can confuse you and make it much harder to reach consensus on a common output.
Yeah, that's, as I've said, that's already a pretty diverse field of research that you're doing. But recently, as we've already reported on our social media channels and on our website, you've also gained a new research topic, because the Web3 Foundation is funding a research project on mixnets, which you will lead. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about what mixnets are and what that project is about, and maybe even a little bit about the Web3 Foundation, if you will?
Well, a mixnet is a means of anonymizing communication at a very high level. Essentially, all of the internet traffic today is not secure, right? I mean, if you don't use something like a VPN or some kind of encryption, all your communication and all of your data packets are just public, and an eavesdropper that taps into the network can see all of these data packets, and it can just see everything that you're communicating. And clearly this is not ideal. And we also know how to solve this, right? So we can simply encrypt all of our data packets using something very simple, such as public key encryption, or even symmetric key encryption if we manage to exchange a key with the party that we're communicating with. So that's not very difficult. But one issue that is growing more and more important, I think, in our society is that it's not just the data that you're exchanging that can be problematic and then can be an issue for privacy. It's also the metadata of this data. For example, at what times of the day you might be communicating with a certain correspondent, or I don't know, like if you log into a server at a certain time of the day, and an attacker might also be interested in that kind of data. And this is something that you can't protect using public key encryption, because public key encryption does not conceal the fact that you're communicating, right? It still leaks the fact that you are sending some kind of data packets and data traffic. And this is essentially the goal that mixnets try to solve. They try to make it so that an attacker doesn't see what information you're sending is real information, and what information is simply there to hide your traffic, so cover traffic, so to speak. So it introduces additional data packets and uses other tricks to conceal which information you're sending is the real information.
So let me so someone could gain information about me just from the fact that I am communicating, even without seeing what I'm communicating. So he or she can read my messages, or I don't know, can see my files I'm sharing.
Yeah, and not only that, right? I mean, they can even see where your traffic is going, right? I mean, maybe that fact by itself, that information might already be problematic, right? If you want plausible deniability, you want to claim that you've never ever communicated with a certain person, or you've never gone to a certain website, then clearly you cannot protect against this kind of thing if the attacker can see that your data traffic is flowing to this server that you're claiming that you've never visited before. Right? Yeah. So
is that something that a normal VPN would solve?
Yes. So a normal VPN can already solve this. And then this is, for example, what also the Tor network gives you, right? So these kind of services, they can provide a certain degree of anonymity by using something called onion encryption or onion routing. And this roughly works in the following way, that so this is not what a VPN does. A VPN is a more centralized kind of approach to this, but Tor does this. So in Tor, onion routing is used, and onion routing is called onion routing because an onion has multiple layers, right? So so you can peel off one layer, and then it looks still like an onion, right? And you can keep peeling off layers until you reach the core. And a very similar thing is done in onion encryption. So in onion encryption, you apply multiple layers of encryption under different keys to the payload of the data. And then in every layer of encryption, so every layer of encryption is done with a different key, and every layer of encryption is meant to be forwarded to one specific server on your path. So say like Alice wants to communicate with Bob, right? And then she will choose a path. Alice herself will choose a path to route a packet to Bob. And now she chooses this path randomly. She knows a bunch of nodes that that are Tor nodes that are meant to anonymize the traffic that she sends. So she can pick a random subset, or she can pick a random path over a certain set of Tor nodes. And now what she does is she applies the onion encryption, or these layers of encryption, in such a way that when her packet reaches the first server, that server can encrypt the outermost layer of the onion. And then it sees where it should forward the data packet next. Yeah. So the first server strips off this outermost layer of encryption, and then it forwards it to the next server, and the next server does the same.
But it doesn't know where it will go in the end.
That is exactly the point. So it does not know where it will go in the end because it cannot decrypt the entire onion, right? There is the next layer cannot be encrypted by the same server. And now the point is that if there is even one single server along this line of servers that is honest and doesn't share the information of where the packet goes next, then the adversary, even controlling all other servers, doesn't know from where to where the packet is going. So this creates a high degree of anonymity for the sender and the receiver, and protects the path which the data packet travels, essentially.
Maybe just for the sake of completeness, what is the difference to a classic VPN? I think everyone that's watched a YouTube video in the past few years will have gotten some degree of advertisement for a VPN.
Absolutely.
So, how does a classic VPN work in comparison to that?
So it's a little difficult to compare these two things, but I would characterize it very, very oversimplified the following way. So VPN is essentially the same as Tor, except that it's run by one central provider, right? So one central provider will encrypt all your traffic and will route it over one tunnel. And the tunnel is established by this central provider. Every packet of data that you're sending goes through this encrypted channel over the server, and the server then forwards it to its intended destination. And from the outside, nobody can actually tell where the data packet is going because you're always sending it to this trusted VPN server who's then forwarding it to its intended destination. So you don't really if the VPN server gets a lot of incoming data traffic, which for sure it is going to be doing because a lot of people use VPN clients nowadays, you cannot distinguish which packet comes in and which packet goes out. All you are seeing is there's a lot of traffic coming in, a lot of traffic going out. And this is the anonymity that you get from a lot of people communicating with the same VPN server. The problem is that the VPN server itself needs to be trusted and it needs to behave correctly. The VPN, for example, sees all of your incoming traffic and it knows where it's going to, right? So if the VPN server would want to steal your data, then they could just do that. and so
or if they are forced by some government to do that.
Absolutely. So if the NSA comes to NordVPN and tells them, I want to know who this guy communicated with, right? And then, so NordVPN would probably cave in and they will be able to tell the NSA this information, right? And this is not possible with Tor. Because in Tor, or it's not impossible, but it's much, much more difficult because you have a lot of different servers and they might not even be in the USA, right? They might be in a very different country somewhere else. And then the USA would have a much harder time, or the NSA would have a harder time tracking down this node and forcing them to give up this information. And they would have to do it for every node individually. So it's a much, much harder process to go through. Mm-hmm.
So you've talked about Tor already. Is Tor a mixnet, or is it
Tor is not a mixnet.
Okay.
No. And the reason that it's not a mixnet is because it doesn't protect your metadata. So it does not protect an eavesdropper who tries to gain some statistical information about what kind of data you're sending by doing timing attacks or by just checking the amount of data that you're transmitting. It doesn't conceal these types of information. The only thing that it conceals is the path of the data packets that are traveling, but it's not concealing how much data you're sending or what times you're sending them at.
Okay, so what is a mixnet doing additionally to hide these metadata?
So there are a bunch of tricks actually that a mixnet does on top of what Tor does. So one thing is that a mixed node introduces additional data packets. It tries to hide the amount of data, for example, that you're sending. It doesn't want to leak the size of the data packets that you're sending. For example, it doesn't want to reveal whether you're sending an email or you're streaming a movie, for example. Mm-hmm. So it introduces a lot of additional data packets that make it difficult for the adversary to tell what amount of actual data streaming you're doing. Because all it can see is that there are a bunch of encrypted packets, but it doesn't know which are the ones that belong to you and which are the ones that have been introduced additionally to confuse the adversary. Another trick that a mixnet can do is to thwart timing attacks. So suppose that the mixnet would just forward all traffic immediately that comes in. Mm-hmm. So just whenever a packet comes in, the packet goes out, right? So the attacker then could, for example, tell, depending also on the size of a data packet, whether or not this is the same data packet that just went in and that now goes out, right? Whatever goes in would have to be forwarded to somebody, and based on this, even if there is additional traffic, you can distinguish a packet that was sent earlier from one that was sent later, right? So using these timing attacks, you can also infer some degree of information and meta information about, for example, at what times communication is happening, right? So one additional trick that a mixnet introduces is that it delays the forwarding of packets. So it keeps the packets for a while, and then after a random short time interval, it might forward this packet to confuse the adversary even further as to which packets were introduced by the mixnet additionally and which were the real ones.
But that does make communication in general more inefficient, right?
It makes it less efficient, yeah, because there's a lot of additional data, and then also now data packets aren't forwarded as quickly as they would usually be, right? Usually they would just be forwarded, and then now they're held back for short times, and then this obviously puts a hamper on efficiency. Yeah.
So it's basically a trade-off between efficiency and security.
Yes, it is a trade-off between these two things. But I think that's not surprising at all. I mean, I think that is always the case for any kind of system where you would like more security, even just something as basic as encrypting a file, right? I mean, if you encrypt it, that takes some work to do, and decrypting it also takes some work. But of course, it gives you privacy. So having additional privacy always comes at the expense of some kind of communication.
Yeah, I remember back in the day when you wanted to encrypt your Android phone, you had to have like a certain type of processor, because otherwise it just wouldn't be fast enough to decrypt the files on the go.
Yeah, no, this is true. And I think that is still true to some extent. I mean, there are now more and more efficient crypto systems, obviously, but I think encryption can still be expensive, especially public key encryption is actually very expensive. So we have ways around that, but they're not optimal for a large degree of network traffic.
But when it comes to mixnets, do you think that could change in the future when bandwidth will become more available and even faster in the future?
I think it already has changed, right? So the Tor is 20 years old right now. And then I think mixnets now have become much more of a feasible thing than they were 20 years ago, just because we have a lot more bandwidth to work with. I mean, for example, if you think about a streaming service such as YouTube, there is a limit to how much improvement in the video quality humans can even appreciate, right? And at some point, it doesn't make a lot of sense to improve video quality even further. And at that point, basically, it means that whatever bandwidth you're adding on top of, the highest bandwidth that you need to stream at the optimal video quality is bandwidth that you could use to hide your traffic and to make it more private. And I think we've already approached this point or even past it. So we have the technology to stream a lot of things at the highest quality, at the highest speed. And now we can think about introducing these mechanisms for making things more private. So I think mixnets could become a thing in the future. But I think until we get there, we still have to make them a little bit more efficient.
And I think your research, the research that you're doing now, is an important part towards that future. But can you tell us a little bit about what your research especially will be when it comes to mixnets right now?
Yes. So actually, one interesting thing is that, I talked before about onion encryption, and I talked about what a mixnet does on top of onion encryption. And so obviously a mixnet also applies onion encryption to just hide the path of travel that a data packet takes. But it introduces these additional mechanisms for making it even harder for the adversary to tell which is real data and which is not. But the aspect that we will be focusing on most is actually going to be the onion routing aspect of mixnets. So what does that encompass? I think what we'll be looking at are security models for onion routing, which already exist in the literature. So that's nothing that will come up new with. But I think a lot of these models for onion encryption have been around for a long time. They might be slightly outdated because back in the day, security models were stated a little less formally than they are now. So they've evolved a lot, and trying to revisit these models and maybe improve them and capture capture newer attacks, let's say modern attacks that have become feasible, since these models were first formalized. That is an important thing that we want to look into. So that is one aspect, just revisiting these formal models and seeing if they still make sense or if they need to be changed a little bit. But another thing that we want to look at is actually one of the most widely used, or one of the most important packet formats in this space, called the Sphinx packet format. So that's been around for a while, and it's sort of like the standard packet format that mixnets would be using, or all mixnet proposals use nowadays, because it's very efficient. And we would like to look at this packet format in formal security models and check whether it actually satisfies all the security properties that it claims. So the proof in the original paper that introduced the Sphinx standard, they are not rigorous, they're not formal, and they're also quite old. And I think it makes a lot of sense to revisit these proofs. And that's going to be one of the things that we want to look at.
Could you maybe talk about the formal security models? Because I think that's a quite abstract concept for people that are not in cybersecurity. Like, how does a security model of an encryption or like of a certain network look like?
So depending on the security goal, the security model might look very different. But in every formal security model that we use in provable security in cryptography, one of the common aspects is usually that we treat an adversary as playing a game against a challenger who challenges the adversary to break the security of its crypto system that it proposes. So the challenger, comes up with some new crypto system, and now we formalize what this game should look like between the challenger and the adversary. So the challenger gives the adversary some information that closely tries to approximate what the adversary would get in the real world. For example, for public key encryption, just as an example, what the adversary is allowed to do in the security game is that it can query the challenger on certain ciphertexts of its choice that the adversary can just make up. And now the challenger will decrypt these ciphertexts and send back the decryptions to the adversary. And this essentially models that we have to make worst case assumptions. We can't predict exactly how this decryption scheme might be used in practice. So maybe if the adversary is very clever, it could trick the owner of a secret key into decrypting a lot of messages, and it can infer information from this. And then if the adversary can gain some information about one specific encryption that it shouldn't be able to do, then the adversary wins this security game. So it breaks the security property of this encryption scheme after witnessing a lot of different decryptions of encrypted messages. And so this is just one simple example of a security game. And another simple example is the unforgeability example, or unforgeability game rather, for signatures. So how does the security game look there? So there, again, we're trying to approximate the real world. And in the real world, you don't really know how your signature scheme is going to be used, right? So what you might do is you might sign a lot of different messages. It's not clear what those messages will be. In the worst case, the adversary could tell you what messages to sign, right? And intuitively, the signature scheme shouldn't lose any of its security properties even after signing many messages, right? It should not be possible to forge a signature even after seeing many signatures on messages of the adversary's choice. And if the adversary in the end is able to come up with a forgery on a message that it hasn't seen a signature on previously, then it wins this security game. So it really depends on what kind of security goal we want to show, but basically it's always formalized as a game between a challenger and an adversary.
So it's basically a very theoretical way of looking at an attacker and a defender. Like
exactly, yes. So and of course, right. And this is just something that maybe some people aren't aware of. It isn't possible to capture all kinds of attacks like this. I mean, there's a very, very famous work by Gödel, actually shows that every axiomatic systems has some properties that you cannot prove or disprove. And this actually implies that it's not possible to capture all attacks that an adversary could launch on a system. So any system, or any security model rather, will always have certain attacks which are not captured. And if these attacks become relevant, or some security breach happens because of them, then typically people refer to them as side channel attacks. And the reason that cryptography is such an active field is because one of our jobs as cryptographers is to continuously update these security model with recent and now relevant side channel attacks and improve and modernize these systems.
So a side channel attack is basically an attack that hasn't been discovered before. Or
maybe people thought it wouldn't be relevant. So one classical example of a side channel attack is an attack on RSA encryption. So what can you do there? Well, in the way that RSA encryption was implemented at some point, you could measure the power consumption of the encryption, or rather the decryption algorithm. And because of the way that the algorithm was implemented, reading the power consumption actually allowed you to read out the secret key. And of course, that's something that the security model doesn't capture. But it is a real world attack, right? And it's very dangerous. And that is a typical example of a side channel attack.
But in an updated security model from today, it already captures this, or?
I think what they did eventually is they just changed the design of the encryption algorithm so that this no longer becomes an issue. But that's, of course, a heuristic, right? I mean, maybe there is still some way of using power consumption to infer information that isn't captured by the model. I mean, that isn't clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say at the end of your research, you have an updated security model for mixnets. That doesn't mean that it's fully secure. You can't really prove absolute security because there's always going to be, or there might not be, but there might be some things that could lead to an attack on these nets.
Yes. So no matter what security model you have, there are always certain attacks that aren't captured by it, that fall outside of the model, and that is something that we have to live with. But that doesn't mean that provable security isn't provable in this sense, right? So what you can prove is that a very wide and relevant class of attacks doesn't work, right? So the attacks that we endow a security model with, or like the capabilities of that we give to the attacker in a security model, they are usually chosen in a way that we believe is the most relevant capabilities that the attacker has. So like the most important aspects of any attack that an attacker could launch on.
So something that might happen in the real world.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, there might be some very, very contrived way of doing an attack on specific systems, but those are much harder to come up with than these like basic kind of security goals that we capture in a security model. So what we actually are able to rule out by giving a security proof in a security model is just a very wide class of attacks, which doesn't encompass all attacks, but probably 90% of all attacks. And we can prove that such attacks are not possible. And you have to come up with a very, very clever new idea to introduce an attack into the system. And that's already much, much better than if you have a system or a scheme which has no security properties that are provable at all, right? And that's, for a long time, actually, people designed crypto that way. And then there were many examples where you could just break a system because something obvious wasn't captured.
So speaking of these security models, how will your work on Mixnets look like in the next 12 months?
So the grant that we got from Web3 now allowed me to hire a postdoc. So Dimitris Papachistoudis, and he started here at the beginning of June. What we're going to do in the next 12 months, hopefully, is to take this pretty old paper about the Sphinx standard and try to prove it in one of the newest security models. And that will involve, of course, first understanding the standard and all of its aspects, then understanding the model and the proof techniques that you need in that model, and then proving it.
Okay. That all sounds very interesting, and I wish you the best and for you and your postdoc in that research. I just have 5 quick questions for you at the end, which we ask every researcher that takes this place here in front of the microphone. So first one is, do you use a password manager? And if yes, why? And if no, why not?
I don't use a password manager. I use my own kind of password manager. So I have a password, which I think is kind of secure, meaning that it's generated from a high entropy distribution. And what I do typically is I derive passwords in the following way, that I take this master password that I thought about, and then whenever I create a new account somewhere, then I take the domain of that account and I concatenate it with this master password. So I form one long sentence basically that is comprised of the master password and the domain of this, or the name of the server, whatever. And then I use a secure hash function to come up with a new password.
Okay.
So the hash function hashes this whole string, and then I get a new password. And then because that's a deterministic process, I actually don't need to remember any other password than the master password. And that's how I keep track of all of my passwords.
That sounds like something a cybersecurity researcher would do.
Yeah, it's a very simple way of keeping track of a lot of passwords, right? I mean, it's not as convenient as a password manager, but I think it's very secure.
Yeah, you could argue it's even safer because it's not like if someone kind of hacks your password safe.
Yeah. So I think it's a very secure way of storing passwords.
Okay, that sounds very cool. Next question. Have you ever fallen for a phishing email?
I've never fallen for a phishing email to a point where I actually did something that I regretted later. But once, I think that was while I was still doing my PhD. Somebody posed as my PhD supervisor, and it was so absurd that I mailed him back to his original email address, right? Like, it's like what do you need from me? I'm not sure I understand. And then he's like, oh, somebody's phishing with my account. But that was the only time that I kind of fell for it.
Is that a CEO fraud? Is that kind of like that thing?
I'm not completely sure what the
I'm not sure
technological term is for that. But I mean, it was something stupid. They wanted an iTunes gift card or something. It was kind of harmless, but still. It was,
sounds like something your PhD supervisor would.
Yeah, no. Actually, I think they just asked me in the first email if I could do something for them, and then I replied.
Yeah, okay.
And then he's like, "Oh, you fell for a phishing email." Yeah. It's kind of embarrassing, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think it happens to the best of us. Next question: as a cybersecurity researcher, do you handle your private data differently than other people do?
I don't think I have a lot of very private data. Apart from my passwords, of course. I mean, I do consider that private data, and then my emails, but they're on I mean, so the answer is no, because I I use Gmail just as most people, right? I just have maybe a more secure way of keeping track of my passwords, and I'm still trusting Google to handle my emails securely. But I think I don't have a lot of very sensitive or private data.
So you're not using social media accounts or anything?
I'm using Twitter, but I think everything on Twitter is public anyway. So somebody could hack my Twitter account, but
I mean, yeah. The question also is like, are you like posting a lot of personal stuff on Twitter, or are you like very aware of that?
Oh yeah, this is. Oh, I see. So I misunderstood the question. So yes, I would never post something very personal on a Twitter account, and I think it's a bad idea. You leave a footprint in.
I think most of the people that work in cybersecurity are kind of very sensitized towards what data someone can, what kind of data someone can infer from you posting like harmless stuff.
Yeah. So I think I would really never try to never post anything that's very personal, or even remotely personal. It's just, yeah.
So next question, smart home, yes or no?
No, definitely no. I think smart homes are terrible from a point of data privacy. I mean, I'm not sure if they give you that much. So I'm perfectly fine with my regular appliances.
You don't need a fridge that orders food for you?
No, I don't. Actually, I rarely order food, so I don't think I would be the target audience for that.
Yeah,
yeah.
Good old grocery stores work fine. German supermarkets.
Yeah, no, that works fine for me. Yeah.
And that's probably it's a very interesting question for you because you work in crypto. How do you feel about cryptocurrencies? And have you maybe even ever invested personally? Which of course you don't have to answer.
No, I'm happy to answer. Actually, I've worked for cryptocurrency for a while. And so Web3 actually is also tied to the Polkadot cryptocurrency. So it's actually the foundation of the Polkadot currency. And I used to work for a cryptocurrency that hasn't gone online yet. It's called Space Mesh. So they're still in the development stage. And so I know a lot of people in the space, and I think it's a very interesting concept. I'm not sure if it's fully developed yet. So why do I think it's interesting? Because I think, so people always ask in this space, like, what's the killer application, right? That's always the question that you hear. And the answer is, there is no killer application that we don't already have, right? So anything that you can do with a credit card today or an online payment service, anything, right? That is the killer application. And you can do the same thing eventually and hopefully with a blockchain system. The only difference being that you're not relying on a trusted credit card company or a trusted bank to keep your data private and implement these transaction services securely, but rather you have a system that has no trust assumptions beyond half of the participants acting honestly in it. And I think this is a very, very interesting concept because there are a lot of issues with monopolizing payment systems. And we see this a lot today, right? So credit card systems effectively have a monopoly on cashless payment systems. In many urban areas, you're not even able to pay with cash anymore. And so that means you're forced to pay the credit card provider to buy something. And then stores are forced to have expensive contracts with these credit card providers so that they can offer these cashless services. And I think that's not a good development. There are even some countries like in Scandinavia, Sweden, Denmark, in many places, you simply cannot pay by cash anymore, right? And this gives these companies a lot of power. And I think demonopolizing these kind of scenarios is one of the most intriguing applications of blockchain technology. And I think that's what makes them interesting to me as a cryptographer. And yes, I do have some investment in Ethereum. I'm not going to say how much, but I do have some Ethereum, yeah. And I wouldn't recommend to anybody to see it as a serious investment. don't invest any more than you're absolutely willing to lose, because the market has a lot of swings.
I think that's always a kind of a good advice when it comes to investing in volatile products.
Yeah, but I think here it's especially important, because the market is just, I think it's unpredictable and it's extremely volatile. And, so, yeah.
Okay, thanks for your input. I think it was very interesting, because you're the first cryptographer we've had on this podcast that could actually talk about their experiences with crypto. So thanks a lot. And also thanks a lot for taking the time to do this interview. Yeah. I'm wishing you all the best for your research project, and I hope it will get extension beyond the 12th month. And hopefully we'll have some very secure mixnets in the future, thanks to your work. And
thank you very much.
Have a nice day.
Thank you. You too.
We'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks. You too.